As I'm sure you know, the purpose of school is to prepare you for adult life. And one of the ways that we learn about life and how to live it is through the fables, which have come up through every culture throughout the years, which teach us fantastic life lessons. And out of all the fables that I've come across, and I use a lot of fables with my clients and with my family, my favourite is one called The Chinese Farmer and the Horse. And this is how it goes. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lived with his son in a small village. And one day they went out looking for wood. And as they were looking for wood, they came across this beautiful stallion. And they had some rope with them, so they snuck up to it and put the noose over its neck and brought it back to their farm and put it in an enclosure. Well, when the neighbours found out, they came over to see the farmer and his son and said, "Wow, look at you, you've now got this stallion. How that'd be great help round the farm." And the farmer, who was old and wise, said, "Well, maybe yes, maybe no, who knows? All I know for sure is I've now got a horse when I didn't have one before." Well, the next day, the horse was running round the enclosure and managed to escape and disappeared. And that was the end of the horse. Well, the neighbours, when they found out, came round and said, "Oh, you poor things, you had a horse before, which was so useful, and now you got none again. That's a bad thing to happen, isn't it?" To which the old farmer said, "Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? All I know is that yesterday I had a horse and now I don't." Well, later the next day, the farmer and his son were out walking through the forest looking for wood, and they spied their stallion again. Their beautiful stallion, but near the stallion were 4 other wild horses. Well, they went up to their stallion and put a loop of rope round its neck and started to drag it back towards their farm. And the 4 other wild stallions came along with them. And so by the time they got back to the farm, they soon had all 5 horses in their enclosure. Well, you can imagine what the neighbours thought when they saw this. They were like, "God, it's like you won the lottery. I mean, with 5 horses, you don't need all 5 round the farm. You could sell some of them and you could get some good money for these stallions." Well, the farmer considered their opinion and said, "Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? All I know is I now have 5 stallions." Well, the neighbours were now a bit bemused by all this, because it was like, you should be excited about it. This is fantastic news. And here was this old farmer who was just taking it all in his stride. But anyway, they left him to it and wandered off. The next day, the farmer's son was on the back of one of the wild horses and trying to tame it, when suddenly this stallion reared up and threw this son on the floor, and he landed on the floor with a big crack as he broke his leg on impact. Well, when the neighbours found out about that, they came rushing over and said, "Woe is you, you really are in deep doo-doo now, because your son, he's your main source of labour on the farm. What are you going to do now with a son on crutches? This is really bad." Well, the farmer responded in his usual way. "Maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? You can't judge your life from one event, just as you can't judge a book from one page. Life is just the way it is. And all I know is that my son now has a broken leg. Well, the neighbours wandered off back to their own farms. The very next morning, the emperor rode into town, into the village, with all his soldiers. And the soldiers conscripted. They grabbed hold of all the able-bodied young men and took them away to war. Well, you can imagine the response of the neighbours. They were just distraught because it was likely that a good percentage of those sons would never come back alive. So they said to the farmer, "You are so lucky, at least you still have your son, even though he has a broken leg, which will mend over time." To which the farmer again replied, "Maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows?" Now that to me is a terrific story, because we can see how we can't be really sure what's going to happen as a consequence of an event. So what we consider to be a good event may not later turn out to be quite so good, and what's a bad event may not turn out to be quite so bad. And let me give you an example from real life. I mean, there's loads I could give you. But there was once this 12-year-old boy in America, and he got this new bike. Well, good event. He was so proud of it. He rode it into town and parked it outside this big auditorium and went inside. When he came out, his beloved bike had been stolen. Bad event. Yeah? Well, he was so upset. He thought, well, who can I tell? What am I going to do? Well, inside the auditorium were some steps going down. So he went down the steps, and at the bottom of the steps there was an area where a police chief was teaching some young teenagers how to box. And so the police chief got talking to this young lad and said, maybe you can learn to box, because you've got all this pent-up anger in you. It might be useful to learn to box. So within 6 weeks, this boy won his first boxing title, his first fight. Does anybody know the name of this boy? Well, the boy's name, he grew up to be Muhammad Ali. His boy's name was Cassius Clay. He went on to become one of the greatest, or the greatest boxer in the world. And not only did he inspire billions of people around the world, but he had a significant impact on black Americans. Extraordinary individual. But can you imagine if his bike hadn't been stolen? Then maybe he would never have taken up boxing. So rather than that bike being stolen as a bad event, it was just an event that led to a certain consequence. Now, of course, if those boys had been caught red-handed stealing those bikes, they couldn't have said to the police officers, well, it isn't bad stealing a bike, it's just an event. Because there's a reason for that, and it's called consequences. If you take a bike, it's not bad. In theoretical, philosophical terms, it's just an event, but there are consequences. If you today shove somebody, you can't justify your action to a teacher and say, well, that's just an event. There are consequences to shoving individuals or talking out in class. But what they are is just events. Now, if you can imagine that your life is a series of events, what you have is a series of events, and what can appear to be bad events in the past could turn out to be good, and what could be good events can turn out to be bad. We just don't know. So while you've been listening to me over the last 10 minutes giving this talk, There'll be times when you're worried about the future, thinking about a bad event that happened earlier today or in the previous days. Does that make sense? Equally, you could have been worried about something later today or in the future, some concern you have about your future life. But maybe there's no need. Maybe where the magic is to be right now. To be here right now today. You know, the most famous poem voted by the population of Britain is a poem by Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, you may know, wrote the book, The Jungle Book, which went on to become a big Disney film. Well, his poem was called If. And towards the end of that poem, these lines, he says, if you can keep your head when all around you are losing theirs, then you'll be a man, my son. Now, of course, he's, for all you women, he's referring to you as well. It was just the times that he was writing. So if you can keep your head, then you will act in a mature, wise way. And greatness will happen to you as a consequence. Now, I have sons in this school, Toby in year 8 and Felix in year 4. And one of the things we talk about is looking at life separately and looking at the way people are. And what we've noticed, and I've pointed out to them, is that some of the people we know who are in really good jobs are there because they got promoted, because they kept their head when others lost theirs. And one of the ways you do that is when you see an event, you don't get all upset about it. You take a step back and think it through what's to do next. So what I'd like you to consider in your life is being able to be present now. Because if you can be present today and make the most of today, you'll be calm, you'll be grounded, you'll be able to stay focused in lessons. You'll have ideas come into you, thoughts and answers to questions will come to you because your mind is clear. So this is the opportunity. When you see events as neutral rather than good or bad, it quietens the mind down.